Okay.
Hi, I'm Scott Siegel, and I'm going to be presenting some information about Santa Ynez Valley Union High School District's budget. There we go. Okay. A little trouble there advancing the slides. So I'm just going to introduce myself. This presentation was, before I introduce myself, this presentation was made for the school board, and a very similar version to this was given to the school board. This is actually a little more up to date because it's been updated with more current budget numbers. So my name is Scott Siegel. I'm a retired superintendent. I worked in Ceres, California, in Ceres Unified School District for most of my career. I started as a high school math and science teacher, and then became an assistant principal at Ceres High School, before I was promoted to the assistant superintendent of business services job, which I held for about a decade, and then was superintendent for just over a decade before retiring.
I think if you, just hit to the right.
Okay, to the right.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So I'm going to start just talking a little bit about reserves, because reserves are one of the most important ways that we measure a district's budget health. Reserves are the money that you have left over at the end of the year, going into the next year. Think of it as the amount in your bank account when the month is over, right before you get paid. So there's two kinds of reserves. There's actually many kinds of reserves, but we're going to focus on a distinction between unrestricted and restricted reserves. Restricted reserves are reserves that are there for a very specific purpose. For example, there's a maintenance reserve that's required by the state. That can't be used for other things, so it's restricted. Or Title I dollars might be restricted and can only be used for Title I purposes. For unrestricted, those are dollars that can be used for any educational purpose, for paying for teachers, paying for custodians, paying electrical bills, whatever it might be. Now, there's purposes for reserves. We don't have reserves just because we want to. School district's job is to educate students, and we want to have reserves. Or money in reserve doesn't directly help with that, but we need to have reserves to stabilize programs. And the first way that reserves do that, especially in a district that's funded entirely from property tax dollars, is it helps with cash flow. For most school districts in the state that aren't funded that way, where the state provides most of their money, you get about 12 regular paychecks from the state, and it smooths out that cash flow, just like your paychecks from your job. But imagine if your boss or your employer only had to pay you 2 times a year. That's what basic aid districts or community funded districts have. And Santa Ynez Valley High School District is one of those. So they get paid after the property taxes come in December, and after the property taxes come in April. So twice a year, usually in January and May, they get most of their cash. But you have to survive until you get that cash. So having reserves helps with that cash flow. Also, if something unforeseen happens, like you need a new school bus, or a major piece of equipment breaks down, or a major repair has to happen that you don't have reserves to cover in the maintenance reserves, those kind of things can hurt. And the smaller a district is, the more they can hurt. So a smaller district like Santa Ynez Valley High School will need a larger reserve than say a large school district with many schools and a bigger budget. Reserves also help you buy time. If things change dramatically, either your expenses go up or your revenues go down, reserves allow you time to make decisions without rushing and hurting programs. So you can make a more measured, thoughtful decision if you have a year or two to fix things before money runs out. And also, when you're building your budgets, the state expects us to do multi-year projections. Multi-year projections tend to be fairly negative in the impact they have on your reserves. And so when you do them, often your reserves dwindle. When you have good reserves to start out with, they don't dwindle to nothing. And you can show that we are viable as a district budgetarily for the next few years. So also, one of the ways that the state monitors us and we monitor ourselves as school districts is we have 5 budget snapshots during the year. When we adopt the budget, we know what our reserves are projected to be. By first interim, which is due by December 15th and reflects everything through October 31st, we have a snapshot of how those reserves have changed. Same thing with second interim, which reflects all activity through January 31st. As we get close to the end of the school year, we do estimated actuals, which is basically a net last chance before the final numbers to guess what is that reserve or project what's that reserve going to be at the end of the year. The reason we do it right before we build the next budget, usually in April and May, is because we then use that number. We're going to end this current year at X number of dollars. Well, that's how many dollars we're going to start the next year with. And then we have unaudited actuals, which reflect everything through June 30th, but aren't usually available until September 15th because there's a lot that has to go on to close the books. And that gives us our final answer as to how much reserves we actually had in that budget year. I'm going to focus on the next slide. It's going to have some spreadsheets on it. And I want to make sure that if you're looking at those, we're going to focus on 3 columns: the projected unrestricted ending balance in dollars for each year, column H, which will be the ending balance as a percentage of the budget, and column K, which will tell us how it's changing from one year to the next. If the number is positive in column K, that means we are spending less money than we're taking in. If it's negative, that means we're deficit spending or taking in less money than we're spending. So in this spreadsheet, and there's a lot here, but I'm going to focus on like I said, columns G and H. And if you look at column G, it shows in dollars what we projected the unrestricted ending balance to be, or the unrestricted reserves. And you can see that for a while there, we have numbers in the 4s, 5s, and 6s of millions, even getting up into the 7 millions at the end of 2017, 2018, and 2018, 19, and so on. But then the reserves start to dwindle down. They come down below 6 by 2021, stay below 6, and then they go to the next page. They drop down to below $5 million last year and are currently projected to be around $4 million at the end of this year. As a percentage, you can see what's happening now. Because of inflation, the amount of dollars actually needed to maintain that percentages increases, so that a $5 million reserve today is not the same as a $5 million reserve was 5 years ago. And you can see that while we were in the 40s and 50s percentage-wise for much of this spreadsheet, as you go down towards the bottom, it drops into the 30s and even into the 20s at times, and is currently just over 20% right now, which is a lot lower than it was previously. And you can see if you look in column K on this page, the deficits on column K are close to $1 million projected for this year, meaning the district is taking in $1 million less than spending. So that's something that's going to have to be fixed. Here it is, all that spreadsheet boiled down into one nice neat little graph, the number of dollars in the ending balance over time. And you can see that they peaked up around 1920 or 2019, 2020, and they've been dropping ever since. The last bar is not dark, fully shaded in, because it's still a work in progress. Those numbers reflect second interim, not the final ones. All the other ones are final ending balances. But there was an issue in 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021, where the auditors moved an expense from 2020, 2021 back a year. And in doing that, it changes where 1920 actually ended. So I'm going to go forward, and it's going to show that correction, and you'll watch that 2019, 2020 bar, it'll drop a little bit. And in doing that, it actually helps us understand the pattern better. But it's going to make more sense if we go ahead here and look at things not in terms of dollars, which change in value over time, but in terms of percent, because the percent of the budget is a cleaner way to look at it, because dollars aren't worth as much today as they were in the past. So here's the unrestricted ending balance in terms of percentages. And you can see it peaked up around 60% way back in 17, 18, and then dropped. But I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to advance the slide, and you're going to see the 1920 number adjust. It's going to create a pattern. I'm going to have a line coming on that pattern. And so just to go back to make sure you caught that, you'll watch the 1920 bar, it goes down, and then that red line drops in. And what you see there is the district has actually been, the reserve as a percentage, been dropping steadily since it peaked out in 17, 18, close to 60%. Now, people sometimes ask me, what's the appropriate percent amount for a school district? Well, that depends on the size of the school district, whether the school district is funded by the state or community funded, and a number of other factors, including size. So in this case, my best recommendation would be don't want to drop below 20%. you probably don't need to be over 30% either, or much over 30%. And so the district is right now in the sweet spot. The problem is that it's in the sweet spot, but going down. And if it continues to trend down, it will leave that and be, in my opinion, be too low. It's also my opinion that we were probably too high back in the past. But what we want to do is stabilize the reserves and get them to flatten out, stabilize at about the current level, maybe 20 to 25%, and then the district will be in a better position to look at expanding programs as new revenues come in. So I also wanted to look at, are there patterns in budget development? The 2023, 2024 numbers, they're not final, and I want to look and see, could they change a lot? Some districts you see very large increases of the ending balance as the books close. And so if I look at what has happened in between years, this kind of gives us an idea. And I'm really going to focus on 21, 22 and 22, 23, because those are the most recent ones. And what they show is that, yes, it's likely the district will pick up a little bit of money as the year continues on, but it's not going to be a lot. So instead of ending around 23%, maybe the district will end around 25%, but we'll still be losing reserve levels. And so there's still a problem that will need to be corrected. Just to make sure it's clear what's going on here is these represent, each of these clusters of bars represent the adopted budget, first interim, second interim, estimated actuals, that's the E1, and unaudited actual, which is the U bar, and the final one. And you can kind of see how those progress over the years. In the past, there's been some volatility, but those were associated with very specific events or money coming into the district unexpectedly, or expenses coming in unexpectedly. And things have been a little more stable the last few years. And again, I don't expect that 23, 24 is going to close miraculously higher, although anything is possible. So the conclusions that we draw from looking at all that is the district is losing roughly 6% of its reserve levels each year. In other words, if things don't change, the district will go from roughly 24% at the end of this year to about 18% next year, 12%, 6%, and you can see where that's going to cause a problem. The district needs to fix that and get things resolved. So good news is the current reserve levels are high enough that they do allow the district time to formulate a plan that will be minimally disruptive to educational programs. That said, the sooner action is taken, the better. So in order to kind of get a sense of how this is going to play out, we're going to do some projecting forward, and we're going to start with revenues. And so because this is a community funded district, meaning the property tax, local property taxes make up the bulk of money that comes into this district, property taxes are the first thing we're going to look at, because that is the name of the game for us revenue-wise. And we're going to assume a 3% growth in the core property taxes each year. That's moderately conservative. It's a little bit less than you've been seeing the last few years, but also with interest rates being high right now, the number of properties turning over may go down, and that could slow the growth of property taxes. So here's the property taxes for the last number of years, all the way back to 2016, 17. You can see the total column on the left there, and the projection using the 3% gain down below rose 14 to 18. And it shows us going from property taxes at around 15 million this year to all the way up to $17.5 million by close to the end of the decade. And so that is something that, while undoubtedly this projection is not going to be absolutely correct, because it's not going to be 3% a year, hopefully it'll be more than that. And hopefully it won't be less than that, but that's a good starting point for us as we look at the district's revenues. Now, property taxes are only the majority of the revenues, but they're not all the revenues. And so we're going to forward here to this spreadsheet. Column D is going to show those property taxes, including the projections from the previous spreadsheet down in the lower rows of it. You can see down below 24, 25, all the way to 28, 29. But there's some other money the district gets. They get something called the Education Protection Account from the state. There's a number of other small pots of money, including lottery, which makes up, sometimes people think lottery is a huge part of a district budget. If you look at this, it's less than 1% of the revenues, and so on all the way across the chart there. So that gives us a revenue projection that we'll come back to, but now we're going to look at expenses. And we're going to start, I'll cover the material on this, this slide in just a minute as we go through it. We're going to start with employee expenses, because employees make up the bulk of the district's expenses. School districts are a people business, and they hire lots of people. So as you go across the spreadsheet on the top rows, you'll see teacher salaries, pupil support salaries, all of the certificated salaries, administrators and others. And you can see how much they are projected to be this year and how much they've been in the past number of years. Then we have classified salaries in the 2000 numbers going all the way across to row or column K, where you'll see the total classified salaries this year around $1.9 million. Now, those are not the only salaries, are not the only expenses related to personnel. There's also the state teacher retirement system, STRS, and the public employee retirement system, PERS. And you can see that in the 3000 column down below in column B, along with health and welfare benefits, statutory benefits, and other types of things are considered benefits. You get a total there, and then the 1000 to 3000 in column G is the total cost of employees, including the projection for this year. It's down a little bit this year because of some trimming has already started to occur. And now we're going to look at all the other expenses districts have and also look at projections forward. So you'll see starting at the top in columns A through all the way through I over there, we're going to look at all of the expenses. Starting with B, we have the employee expenses from the previous page. Now I've inflated for rows 11 through 15, which are the future years, inflated those by 1.5% per year, not because of a 1.5% assumption to a salary increase, but because the cost of the retirement systems is going up by 1% a year. And because employees, as they advance across schedules, they get built-in raises, and we're adding 0.5% for those. And that gives us the numbers that are there. We also have books and supplies, which are the 4000s, or 4000 is an object code, meaning things that we buy, materials, supplies, objects. And those are, if you look at from rows 2 through 9, you can see that they've accelerated or they've increased sharply in the last few years. We're going to back them off down to 800,000 in the projection, although I'm hopeful that they can be backed off even more and undo some of that increase that occurred. Not sure that we could go much past 800,000, so I left it at 800,000. In services, which are things like electricity and legal bills and other services, so expenses you pay that are not for things, that's in column D, and you'll see a very sharp increase in that over the years. I've backed that off to $2,500,000 moving forward because I'm hopeful the district can get those pushed back a little bit and exercise some small trimming or belt tightening. We have capital outlay, which I've left at 100,000 a year, although it's more variable than that. Payments to this special education consortium is in column F. Those are accelerating per the information given to us by the consortium, although we just had an increase in that to $2.3 million for this year. So I'm expecting that the numbers below may be actually overly optimistic, unfortunately. Now, if we take all of those numbers, then we add in some transfers. There are transfers outside of the general fund that have to occur, some for debt service, some for routine repair and maintenance and other types of things. We add those in and we get the final projection down at the lower right-hand portion of the page, which shows us going all the way up to about $17.3 million in expenses out in 28, 29. Now, it's important to understand that all those things were just projections. The actual amounts are going to change, and that's not going to be correct. I'm hoping that I'm actually wrong in the right way, meaning that I've underestimated the revenues and overestimated the expenses a little bit, and that we come in better shape than this is going to show. But the next page shows a balance sheet, which is going to take us through what if we don't change anything. No salary increases for employees, no reductions to personnel. We don't hire additional personnel. We just leave things as they are. What would happen? And the district continues to run deficits for a few more years under that scenario. What makes things get better is that property taxes are going to increase because under Prop 13, they can go up 2% a year. Most people are living in properties that for the tax purposes are assessed way underneath what the values of the property actually is. And so they will continue to see increases to their property tax bills. And that will help solve this problem. If we do nothing, it just takes a few years to get there. And it's in the 25, 26 or 26, 27 year that the district comes into balance. A little lower than we would like, but not super low. And then we can move forward from there. But what we can't do at this point is add a lot of new programs or costs. We should actually do the opposite. We should look at, are there things that we can trim, not things that are going to hurt students, but are there things that we maybe can do without? So there's some recommendations we have in this conclusion. So if the district does not increase expenditures, you got 2 to 3 years of property tax should eliminate the problem. Until the unrestricted reserve levels are stable to growing, my recommendation is the district should refrain from adding to expenditures, not additional personnel, not additional programs. It's not time to do that right now. The time right now is to kind of get this under control before it becomes a very serious problem. Right now, it's just a problem. If you go a few more years at the way it's been happening, it will become a very serious problem. So the board has to decide, one of the things they need to do is what reserve level is appropriate and how quickly that reserve level must be attained. My recommendation is, 20, 25, even 30% would be ideal. And then doesn't need to be higher than that, but it needs to be stable or growing. And then you can start adding programs, look at compensation, look at additional personnel if they're needed. So I would definitely recommend the district explore expenditure reductions in the object codes 4,000 and 5,000. Those were the books and supplies, and the 5,000s are the services. As an example of how to do it in a way that doesn't really hurt kids, because we do not want to hurt education, is right now, I don't know what the district's replacement of computer schedule is, but let's just say it's 3 years. Could it be 4 years between replacing computers? Or if it's 4, could it be 5? Can we make things last a little longer before we replace them? Not to the point that they don't work, but to the point that you use their full lifetime. Can we look at ways of conserving electricity? Can we look at ways of, as people leave, are there ways that we can, as there is attrition, can we move people around to make sure that critical jobs are being done? And perhaps look at, are there areas where we really don't need to continue to do things? Can we consolidate work? It's hard because that makes people work harder, but we just need to do what we have to do to get this budget situation resolved before it becomes serious or super serious. So we also should be having conversations with the Special Education Consortium to see if there's ways to contain costs without hurting kids. Our special education kids need the services they get, but sometimes there are different ways of providing them. And then if there are areas, again, everything should be looked at. If there are areas that will not cause educational hardship, can we do them? And I believe that is the end. I hope that this was helpful for you. And if there are questions, I know Alicia can respond to those. And if she can't, she'll let me know and we'll respond together. So thank you for your time.